Suffering is what we're looking at, and just how important suffering is, and why God allows suffering. One of the things that we have today is a bunch of people, at least in our culture, who feel that they have a right to avoid suffering for the faith. The problem with that, obviously, is that Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And the common experience of Christians since Jesus died and rose again has been that of suffering. Not always suffering. There have been good days where there have been no suffering. But when suffering comes, we're called to endure it, looking to Christ for our help. A really good way to think about this is we all suffer because Adam sinned. The book of Romans tells us that in Adam all die. It was Adam's sin. However you want to look at that, whether you can look at sin as a disease or it's just a condition or a new way of living. Adam's sin removed them from the perfection and innocence of the Garden of Eden, where all they had to do was wake up in the morning, walk with God, and literally pluck food off of trees to eat it and enjoy it. Ah, the life. But they messed that up, right? And we can't sit there and go, oh, Adam was so dumb. Because if it was us, we probably would have done the same thing, right? Because we do that over and over and over again. So, as we've been looking at this passage, and we'll want to ask this question, why do we suffer? What does suffering mean? Who sends the suffering? And was the suffering justified? And what good came out of that? Was there any good that came out of the suffering? Because these are really important questions, I think. Again, looking back over the past couple of weeks, we had a guy very loudly and vocally with a lot of followers behind him saying the rapture's going to happen, the rapture's going to happen, the rapture's going to happen. Well, come to find out, it didn't happen, and I guess Jesus didn't know which calendar it was going to be on. So now it's going to be on the Julian calendar of October 6th and 7th. That's what they're saying. And so like any other good false prophet, he's now amassing himself a cult following. That's usually what happens. And people are going to listen to a false prophet that's been debunked because they're going to make up another lie. All because people want to avoid suffering. Okay. There's a common idea that the whole last 7 years before Christ comes is known as the tribulation. That's been a common teaching in the United States for many years, at least 100 years. That isn't necessarily so. Because and we're going to start here in Matthew 24, but we're going to jump back into Genesis chapter 6. We're going to discuss the flood tonight and what led up to that. Jesus says this in Matthew 24, "For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah." Well, let me just back up a couple verses. "Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near." Right? Days are getting shorter out here. We know fall is upon us. We're probably going to experience some cool weather. We're just paying attention to the season that we're in. You look at the fig tree, it becomes tender, put forth its leaves, you know summer's near. Even so, you too, when you see all these things, recognize he is near, right at the door. And we can discuss what all those things are, but it begins with the abomination of desolation, the short time of great tribulation, the cosmic signs that finally lead up to the return of Christ. That's what he's referring to. He says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words shall not pass away. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days which were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, they were marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Then there shall be 2 men in the field, one will be taken, the other will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, and the other one will be left." A lot of times people will use those last 2 verses in this passage out of context and say, see, Jesus is going to come back, Two guys are going to be in the field. One's going to be taken in a rapture, and the other's going to be left for judgment. Two women will be grinding. One will be taken in the rapture. The other will be left. But that's not what the context states. The people outside the ark were taken in judgment. The flood came and took them all away, just washed them away. And in reference to what Jesus is saying here, when he returns, the wrath of God, which is what the flood was in Noah's time, will take people away. It will wash them away. They'll be caught in it. They were unaware. Think about what it was like for what was going on in the days of Noah. Okay? We go back to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6 gives us a lot of information. Really important passage. Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, and the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. The Nephilim here, that's just literally a transliteration there. That's the fallen ones. They were on the earth in those days. Also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, these were the mighty men of old, mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Violence on the earth, evil all over the place. The Lord was sorry he had made man on the earth. He was grieved in his heart. And the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things, to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And it goes on and says, these are the records of the generation of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generations, or perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God. The earth was filled with violence. The Lord God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. And then he goes and tells them how to make an ark. Okay. Can you imagine living in a time of that kind of difficulty? There was violence all over the earth. We have no idea how many people were born before the flood. We don't know how many people were alive when the flood came. I'm going to read to you 2 other extra biblical books that are historical in nature. They're not scripture, but they are from history. The book of Jubilees is mentioned several times in the Old Testament. And it says this, and it happened when the sons of men commenced to increase over the face of the whole earth, and daughters were born to them, that the angels of the Lord saw them in 1 year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon, and they took unto themselves wives from all of them whomever they chose, and they bore them sons, and these were giants. And injustice increased over the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, from men to animals to beasts to birds, all that walked upon the earth, all corrupted their way and their orders, and began to devour each other, and unrighteousness increased over the earth, and all the thoughts of the knowledge of the sons of men were thus wicked all the days. And the Lord looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, and all flesh corrupted its order. And they all did evil in his eyes, all that were on the earth. And God said, I shall destroy mankind and all flesh that has been created above the face of the earth. Noah alone found grace before the eyes of the Lord. And concerning the angels whom he sent upon the earth, he was greatly enraged that he would root them out of all their power. And he said to us, that we should bind them in the depths of the earth. And behold, they are bound in the midst of the depths and separated. And against their children came a word from before the face of the Lord, that they should be slain with a sword and be removed from under heaven. And he said, My spirit shall not abide with men forever, for their flesh let their days be 120 years. And he sent into their midst his sword, that they should slay his neighbor. And they began to slay one another until they all fell upon the sword and were destroyed from the earth. And their fathers witnessed it. And after these After this, these were bound in the depths of the earth until the day of the great judgment for the coming of punishment unto eternity over all those who have corrupted their ways and their works before the Lord. He destroyed all of their places, and not a single one was left of them who was not judged according to their wickedness. And he made for all of his works a new and righteous nature, so that they did not sin in their entire nature until eternity, and were righteous each in his generation all the days. So it goes on and continues with that. That's the book of Jubilees talking about this issue. The book of Jasher is also mentioned in the Old Testament, and it says this in chapter 2 of the book of Jasher. And it said, and the sons of men, this is in the days of Enosh, it was in the days of Enosh that the sons of men continued to rebel and transgress against God, to increase the anger of the Lord against the sons of men. And the sons of men went and served other gods. They forgot the Lord who created them in the earth. And in those days the sons of men made images of brass and iron, wood and stone, and they bowed down and served them. And every man made his god, and he bowed to them. And the sons of men forsook the Lord all the days of Enosh and his children. And the anger of the Lord was kindled on account of their works and the abominations which they did in the earth. The Lord caused the waters of the river Gihon to overwhelm them, and he destroyed and consumed them. He destroyed the third part of the earth, and notwithstanding this, the sons of men did not turn from their evil ways, and their hands were yet extended to do evil in the sight of the Lord. And in those days there was neither sowing nor reaping in the earth. There was no food for the sons of men, and the famine was very great in those days. And the seed which they sowed in those days in the ground became thorns, thistles, and briars. For from the days of Adam was this declaration concerning the earth, of the curse of the Lord, which he had cursed the earth on the account of the sin which Adam sinned before the Lord. So these men just continued to rebel. Think about what it would have been like for Adam. Okay, he sins, he's kicked out of the garden. I mean, he and Eve have got to figure out a way to move forward, right? Like, they can't just depart from one another and live on different sides of the planet, right? As much as he might have wanted to, and she might have wanted to, and I'm sure they probably had a lot of arguments about whose responsibility it was to get them kicked out of the garden. But he loves his wife, and she loves him, and there's conflict, and then they have kids, and their kids grow up, and they got a bunch of kids. Like, I think Jewish tradition holds that they had like 33 kids. There's a bunch of kids. They might have had more than that. She could have been, Adam was 900 some years old when he died. Eve could have been, pregnant for 100, 200, 300 years out of all that, and she could have had a ton of kids. And then those kids grow up, and they've got kids, and those kids grow up, and they got kids. Honestly, so Enosh would have been Adam, Seth, Enosh. This is his grandson in the days of Enosh. In the days of Adam's grandsons, they begin to make false gods. Some dumb boy of Adam's, some dumb I'm just thinking, like, Adam's sitting over there going, "What are you doing, boy?" "Oh, I'm just making something." And then he walks off, and the next thing you know, he's bowing down to this little statue he made. And I'm just thinking, Adam's going, "This is not what I taught you guys. Come on now, And you just have to think, that didn't take very long for Adam and Eve to sin. It didn't take very long for the ways of mankind to go astray on the earth. It didn't take very long. And left to ourselves, we destroy ourselves. So in the days of Enosh, it was bad. In the days of Jared, that's when the sons of men, or the sons of God and the daughters of men got together. And there's a question about this that most people go, "What? Angels with women? Where's that in the Bible?" Okay, so I just want to show you where this is at in the New Testament. And this is just kind of an aside. It's a case in point. And it really does kind of describe some things that were going on in the New Testament. Jude chapter 5, or Jude is only one book, or one chapter, but he says this, verse 5. "Now I desire to remind you, though you know all things once for all, that the Lord, after saving a people out of the land of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe." Okay? God sends judgment. "And angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day." What's he referring to? It's these sons of God who came down and did some stuff with the daughters of men. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Why did God finally allow Sodom and Gomorrah to be destroyed? What happened with the angels? Was the men of Sodom and Gomorrah wanted to have carnal knowledge with them. And that's literally what happened. And then finally, the angels were like, Lot, you got to go, get your family. And they had to drag them out. That's not the only place in the New Testament it discusses this. And you know, that's just kind of, it's a case in point to show you just how far mankind goes. I mean, if it can be done and it shouldn't be done, mankind has probably already done it or have thought about doing it. And that's why you end up with all sorts of really crazy things that people get involved with. And you go, what? You did what? And it's just, who comes up with this stuff? People do, right? So here's what First or Second Peter says. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there were also false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing swift destruction upon themselves. Adam and Eve were deceived before the flood. But deception didn't end with Adam and Eve being deceived. Satan saw all of these boys and girls being born and all these kids growing up. And I'm just thinking, man, he saw deception like Walmart. You know, I can just pick the ones I want and deceive them. And they were deceived. But we know since the days of the apostles, there have been many people who have risen up, false prophets, bringing in heresies, teaching lies, going after things they shouldn't do. They're going to bring destruction on themselves. And it says, many will follow their sensuality, and because of them, the way of the truth will be maligned. We see that, don't we? People bringing a judgment upon the church. And the church has these people involved with things, and the people at large go, see, I told you, you can't trust those folks. They malign the way of the truth. And in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their judgment from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, when did they sin? When the sons of God came to the daughters of men. They sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to, and that word hell right there is the word Tartarus. Cast them into the deepest abyss and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment. And did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, the preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the earth of the ungodly. He's connecting the sin of the angels with the flood of Noah. And if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who would live ungodly lives thereafter, and if he rescued the righteous Lot, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men, in context, it's the same things. These people brought on themselves suffering because of their choices that were unnatural. For by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day with their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the flesh with its corrupt desires and despise authority. Who did that? Well, it was the people before the flood. They indulged in the flesh. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah indulged in the flesh with these sensual desires. Jesus, when he died, went to the lower parts of the earth. I think 1 Peter discusses this. And he preached the gospel to those who were in prison. The people, the individuals that he preached the gospel to who were in prison are these angels. What you have to understand from the text here is that Noah was blameless, perfect in his generations. There was no mixture of anything else blood-wise, DNA-wise, in Noah and his family. But it would seem that everybody else was guilty of this. Everybody else followed a path that they shouldn't have. And everybody got involved with it, and there was nobody that wasn't, except for Noah and his family. God looked at the earth and he said, I'm not going to put up with this. I'm not putting up with this much longer. They brought suffering on themselves. God was there. God saw it. The people began to call upon the name of the Lord before the flood. There were righteous people, but as you see in the book of Jasher and as you see in the book of Judges and in these other passages, 1,500 years is not a long time, but it was long enough for people to forget that God created the heavens and the earth and that He was righteous, and He kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden because of their sin. There was not enough time for them, we think in our minds, to stay righteous. I mean, could they not stay righteous? We know what the end of the sinful nature is when it's left to itself. Apart from the Lord coming to us individually and saving our souls and putting a desire in our heart to know Him, regenerating our soul, making us one of His children, adopting us into His family. Apart from that, you and I will destroy ourselves. The book of Romans says there's none righteous, no, not one. It also says that God gave people up to their corruption. Let me just read this to you out of Romans chapter 1 because I think it's really appropriate to talk when we talk about suffering and where it stems from. He says this, and I'll just read to you this. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The wrath of God is coming because of that. It's already here. And because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. We cannot say God did not make known to us His presence. You can go outside, even if you don't have the Bible, you can look up, you can look at the plants, you can look at the birds, and at some point you're going to think, this didn't happen by chance. Why do we think that? Why does that thought come to mind? It's because God put it there. He made it known. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through that which has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, I'm sure that Adam taught his children, and whoever would listen, the story of creation. But Adam can't control all of his kids. Adam's not responsible for the dumb decisions that his children made. Sure, Adam's choice kicked it all off, and it's a downhill slide from there, right? All right, so, what one generation does in secret, another generation does in private, another generation does it in public, the fourth generation will plot it around and drag it down the streets like a parade, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Adam kicked it off with his dumb sin, but his children perfected it. They just made it worse. They did all sorts of worse things. Even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, but became futile in their speculations. I can just see Adam's children to the fifth generation sitting out there going, how do you think this world was created? And one of them is going to say, well, Adam, Grandpa, says that God created it. And one little boy is going to go, God don't exist. And what do you mean? God don't exist. That's how it comes. And then he's going to start all sorts of things. I don't think that God exists. I think that we were created by the birds. Come up with some crazy thing. What are those things up there in the sky? That must be gods. What about these angels? Those must be gods. The next thing you know, they're creating all sorts of idols and worshiping things that are created, and they reject the knowledge of God. Even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks. They became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God, the God who made everything, for an image in the form of corruptible man, of birds, four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. This is what they were doing before the flood. They could have talked with God face to face if they wanted to. And yet they said, I don't want to talk to Him. I'm going to worship this image that I made with my hands because that's what I want to do. They thought they were wise in that. Therefore, God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, that their bodies might be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged natural function for that which is unnatural. The same way men also abandoned the natural function of the woman, burning their desire toward one another, men with men committing indecent acts. receiving in their own persons the due penalty for their error. And just as they did not see it fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which were not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, gossip, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parent, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful, and although they know the ordinances of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but give hearty approval to those who practice them. When did that begin? It is going on right now, but when did it begin? With Adam's children. It began with Adam with the sin, but his children perfected this. Was Adam perfect his entire life after he sinned and got kicked out of the garden? Well, we don't know what Adam did and didn't do. But I'd like to think that he walked a very different life after the flood. And I'm sure he made mistakes. I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did things he probably shouldn't have done. I'm sure that he made a lot of mistakes. But, his kids, you understand what I'm saying? Our kids, they see what we do and then they go, I'm going to do worse. And his kids and grandkids and great-grandkids to the 10th generation, there could have been 1 million people on the world before the flood. They could have been having kids all the time. We don't know. But we do know this. There was violence. And there was wickedness. And there was degrading passions and lust and all these other things that were coming. This didn't start before the flood. Didn't start after the flood. It wasn't the sons of Noah who created these ideas. These things were going on before the flood. And I think it probably got worse when Adam died. And the world said, great, the old man's dead. Now we can do whatever we want. Right? And so it got worse. And it got worse and it got worse. The angels came and they did that. And all of a sudden they're doing all sorts of other things. We don't know the extent of all how disgusting all that was. We don't know. And there's a lot of rabbit trails that you could think of, just the debauchery that men came up with during that time frame. If it could be done, they probably did it. Okay? And God saw it, and He said, my spirit's not always going to strive with man. God warned them, sent to them teachers of righteousness, Enosh, Canaan, Noah, there were others, Methuselah. They were righteous men out there on the earth preaching truth. And they were telling these people, don't live like that. That's not how God wants you to live. You don't need to live like this. Don't get involved with the judgment's coming. They knew. God told through His people who did listen to Him and did love Him that judgment was coming because of the actions of men. And so, when it came time to consider what was going on, God said, I'm so sorry. Man, I regret making these guys. Did God not know that this was going to happen? Let's pull back. From eternity past, did God not know that this would be the path people would take? Yes, He did. Okay? Why did He continue to allow people to make those decisions back then? Sure. God wants people to know Him. He's not willing that anybody should perish, but all come to repentance, right? Does God force us to choose Him? No. We can make whatever decision we want to make, right? He's given us will, individual will. And with that will, He's given us responsibility for our decisions. We're familiar with this if we ever had kids. We tell our kids, hey, this is what I want you to do. Have it done by this point in time. And we walk away, we go about what we got to do, and we come back and we look at what our kids did. Are they robots? No. Will they always do everything we tell them to? Absolutely not. In fact, sometimes they'll say, heck with that, I'm going to go play. And they make it worse. They might take that mess that you wanted them to clean up and they might make it bigger and they might do more damage and they might do all sorts of other things. And this is reality, right? The sinful nature within man strives toward greater foolishness and sin. And in the 1500 years between the creation of Adam and the flood, mankind had already perfected this. Everything that we see going on in the world today, as far as sin goes, was already being done and exploited over and over and over again, to the point where you would be shocked how prevalent it was. It brought suffering into the world worse than it should have. But all of those negative actions brought suffering. The Bible gives hints to it, where the book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees come right out and say, hey, these giants were eating people. Cannibalism is not a new thing. I mean, there's even historical records of people in North and South America who are like, we got to kill all these giants because they're eating people, right? And we got normal people who are cannibals in different places of the world, and that's, like, even in the United States, sometimes there'll be some crazy serial murderer who's a cannibal, and like, that's like the almost one of the pinnacle of evil things where you're going to be like out there doing that. And we just, the stories that you read in nursery rhymes about giants eating people, someone didn't just come up with that as a fun story. It's based in historical fact. That happened. And what's worse is people were taking advantage of one another. They were murdering each other. They were stealing from each other. They were harming one another, thinking of ways that they could destroy one another. And what that did is it brought suffering to everybody. It indeed was a moment of whoever was the strongest won. I think if we lived in a world like that, that was without law, such lawlessness and evil, it would be a blessing that anybody actually survived. So God said, okay, I'm going to destroy the world. I'm going to destroy the world. And I'm going to get rid of everything. It grieved God's heart that He made man. He's going to blot out man He's created and everything else. This is how far-reaching the effects of man's sin had on creation. God said, I'm going to wipe out man, to animals, to creeping things, to the birds of the sky. What in the world were they doing before the flood? What were they doing before the flood that caused God to react in such a way to wipe it clean? Whatever it was must have been justified, because I'm pretty sure that God's very patient with man. And we may never know. We may never know the extent of the evil that mankind was doing with everything that God created. And God says, no, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm sorry I've made him. And he finds Noah. Noah's blameless. Noah's righteous man. Noah, he walked with God. He was righteous in his time. God looked on the earth. It was corrupt. All flesh was corrupted in their way. It's a clue to what's going on in their DNA and their livelihood and the way they're living. And he tells Noah, go make this ark. Here's how I want you to make it. We don't know how long it took Noah to make it. Could have been 100 years, could have been 120 years, could have been 5 years. We don't know. He was definitely blessed by God in this, and God was using him, showing him how to do it. And we could see, the plan for it. And God said, take all these things. And then, God says, I'm going to bring all of these animals to it. Chapter 7 starts with this. Enter the ark. It's time, Noah. Methuselah was the last of the righteous old men to die. They mourned for Methuselah for 7 days, history records. Noah gets into the ark. They stay in it for 7 days, and then the flood begins. The flood begins. It starts raining. The fountains of the deep rip open. Just crust of the earth like a baseball. And all of a sudden, you got water spewing out from below the ground and water coming down from the skies. And it's doing this for 40 days and 40 nights. The globe of the world ripped open. And what was once a lush paradise, teeming with life, although there was such destruction and all that sin that was going on, it was a beautiful place. There were hills. There weren't mountains as big as what we know. The earth was probably, I'm just thinking like during the flood, the earth probably collapsed in on itself a little bit. So the way that the world looked pre-flood was different than what we know of it. It was even different during the time of Adam and Eve's innocence. But Adam and Eve's innocence caused the curse to come upon the earth so that the earth wouldn't produce for them like it should. And so this devastation happens during the opening stages of this time. Noah's in the ark. Do you know what day Noah entered the ark? Well, the Bible says that Noah entered the ark, let's see here. It says he entered the ark in the 600th year of his life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month. The same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened, and rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So if, as some people think, the world was created around this time of year, September, October, to this evening begins in the Jewish calendar Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. If the world was created, or if Adam was created around the Rosh Hashanah, somewhere around that, the day that the flood began would fall on our Halloween. There's a reason why historically people would run around and remember this. The Mexican or the Spanish, Hispanic cultures have a Day of the Dead. All Saints' Day is big in Catholicism. There's many ancient cultures that have a day of remembrance for those who died. After the flood, they had a day of remembrance. This is the day that we got in the ark and the rest of the world perished. And they remembered those who died in the flood. They would even knock on doors. Trick or treat, open up. Can you imagine the remaining people on the world while Noah's in the ark? You've probably seen a painting of this, where these people are banging on the door of the ark, let us in, and they can't get in because Noah can't open it. God closed it. They're suffering. Why are they suffering? They're suffering because of their sin. They're suffering because they were stubborn in their sin. And God said, I'm going to judge the world. And had they repented, there probably would have been enough room on the ark, right? But according to this, there's some things that you can't come back from, and the only way out is death. And God said, no, it's just going to be Noah and his 3 sons and Noah's wife and his sons' wives. We're going to start over. We're going to start with perfect humans, people who are 100% DNA straight from Adam. We're not going to allow any of this admixture of all this other stuff going on in here. We're not going to do that. The suffering of the flood was sent by God. God chose to flood the world, but He did it in judgment because of the sin of mankind. Who was guilty? Mankind was. And we did all sorts of stupid things. And Jesus said, and we still are, Jesus said the days of His return would be like the days of Noah. You know what they're doing right now? I can remember studying, this was a big deal back when I was in high school. They had cloned a sheep. Sheep's name was Dolly. This was back in the 90s. Back in the 70s, they had successfully had a test tube baby. I think her name was Louise or something like that. She was from the UK. You know how far they've gone since then? They're mixing things together that they shouldn't. Every time that you have look, mythology is full of chimeras. The griffin, there's birds that are mixed with beasts, and that's not natural. That's not what God created. I wouldn't be surprised if they're doing it right now. Pigs with human ears, all these different things that they're doing. Science, in their desire to reject the true knowledge of God, have put themselves in the place of God and said, no holds barred, we'll do whatever we want to do. And Jesus said it'll be like the days of Noah, where there'll be all sorts of manner of evil that's going upon the earth. And we've got all sorts of crazy stuff going on in our world. Open sin and rebellion. And it's getting worse. Jesus said in Matthew 24, lawlessness will increase. Because lawlessness will increase, the love of many will grow cold. You look out in our world today and I did the stats on this a couple of weeks ago. There's like 65 people who die every day in the United States because they got killed by somebody. There's 135 that kill themselves every single day. Not including the children that are aborted because their mothers just don't want them. You know? Satan came to kill and to steal and to destroy. And what God made perfect in the very beginning, Satan has been corrupting all along the way. And he hasn't been alone in this. He's found many willing participants that were made in the image of God who do not care about what God says, and they want to inflict suffering on the rest of the world. That's what they want. There are many people who look at this world and they say, we got too many people, we need to get rid of a few of them. And by a few, they mean 95% of them. And they feel that by getting rid of all these people, that somehow they're going to make the world a better place for themselves. The nonsense that we allow in our world. People ask, where is God in the middle of all these situations? He's with those who are hurting. He's observing those who are hurting others. The day of judgment's coming. It's going to be swift judgment. It's going to be a day that God is going to not flood the earth again. He's going to burn it with fire. Not one jot or tittle will fall away from the law until this all will be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but God's word will not pass away. When you look at the flood, that whole year and 10 days of the wrath of God being poured out, God preserved Noah and his family through it. They went through the time of great trouble. They were in the ark. God didn't translate them to heaven for a year and a half and bring them back on a spaceship. They went through it inside the ark. God was with them. God protected them. They were not carried away in the wrath. God was with them. Did they suffer inside the ark? In ways that you and I have no clue about. Can you imagine being in a floating zoo for over a year? I can imagine that when that year was over and they opened up the door and they started getting out, I'm thinking somebody started running. I ain't never getting back in that boat again. You cannot make me get back in that boat again. Maybe they did sleep. Who knows? You know, maybe the Lord caused them to fall asleep. I'm thinking that they were probably up taking care of some of them animals. Hopefully, some of the animals hibernated. That would have been good for them. You know, they're like bears. They just like get over there in the corner. He's up underneath there. Leave him alone. Well, you know, God remembered Noah. God remembered Noah and all the beasts and everything that was in the ark, and He caused the wind to come over the earth, and the waters began to recede, and God pulled the dry land back out. He raised the mountains up, and then God made it dry enough for people to come back on the earth. Noah came out, his family, they began life again. But they went through a time of great trouble. They went through it. God was with them. And we know from that point, there's been all sorts of suffering since then too. We'll look at some of those instances in weeks to come, but I just want you to understand, suffering is a common human experience. But the suffering that we endure is and can be unique to the times in which we live and the collective decisions that mankind makes while we are alive. Now, if people choose to respect each other and to love each other and to love God, then you'll have less human suffering than if you live in a time of great war and conflict. But every single one of us is going to experience some suffering, and as we see here, most of our suffering is brought on us because of bad decisions we make. We can't blame God for our suffering when we're the ones who are causing the problems to begin with. God is more than willing to let us endure the suffering so that we'll learn from it, hopefully, and avoid it in the future. Can't blame God for that. Does that give us any consolation? Maybe it's an encouragement to us to not sin as much. Maybe it's an encouragement to us to think about the things that we do before we do them so that we can avoid some suffering. And I think we learn this through life experience. I mean, I can look back on my own life and go, yeah, that was really a dumb decision. And I can look back and see all of the years of suffering and waste because of stupid decisions I've made. And that keeps me from doing those same things again. I don't want to go through that. I don't want to walk that path again. You know how hard that is and how difficult it is and how costly it is? How frustrating it is? No, let me just avoid that. Let me just avoid that. I'd like to think that after the flood that, Noah and his sons probably had some good years before sin became an issue again. But read the narrative. Read the narrative. It didn't take very long for it to pop its ugly head back up again. Right. That's right. That's right. And we just continue like we know better, but here we are again, right? Here we are again. So that's right. That's right. And before he died, he lived 350 years after the flood. Before he died, what did his grandchildren do and great grandchildren? Yeah, I mean, you had Nimrod out there building a tower, right? And Noah knew that. He knew what was going on, but he's probably just going, God, I tried my best, Lord. I tried to help them, but these kids, Lord, and God has a plan for history within that, and all of that will be laid bare at the very end. The flood, although brought by God as a punishment and as a measure of wrath against the world, was not permanent in its effects. Now, we're still struggling with the effects of the flood, don't get me wrong. We live in a post-flood world. The weather patterns and all these other things that we deal with, volcanoes and earthquakes and all that, come because of the flood and all of the events because of that. So there are a lot of things that we still deal with as residual effects of this. But we're not being flooded all the time. We're actually receiving a measure of grace when the Lord sends rain, and there's a rainbow. God is being very gracious to those of us who have sinned, and God is still relenting in this. God allows man to do whatever man wants to, right? But there's going to come a point in time when God will step in, and He'll end it. And there are times that God still does step in and says, enough's enough. It's done. This is too much. And when sin rises to a certain point, we see this throughout the Bible, God does step in and He ends that. So maybe that's what we need to pray. Lord, would you just come soon, and would you go ahead and put a kibosh on this? Go ahead and do that, Lord. There's so many human lives that are suffering right now, people who are suffering right now. But Jesus told us this, right? You'll have wars and rumors of wars. You'll have famines and pestilences and earthquakes and all that, and people killing each other. War. People won't like each other. There'll be conflict. All these things are going to happen. This is just the beginning of the birth pains. This has been going on for a long time. That's not new. So suffering is a common human experience, and we're the ones who bring it on ourselves. But thanks be to God. God is gracious, right? He can help us as we suffer and to learn from it, so that we don't have to go back and suffer again. He's gracious. And the stuff that happened before the flood, God put those guys in prison. He said, you're not coming back out again. So we don't want that to happen again. So